All schools must ensure that anyone with a disability is treated equally. We asked Andy Beckett, a senior advisor with National Strategies, to give an overview of what that means in practice. He visited a middle school in Redditch, which is being commended for its disability policies by the children's charity WizKids.
Schools today are now very different from what they used to be. They take an increasing diversity of the communities they serve. This includes children and young people with disabilities. The legal framework that's put in place is there to support schools to make sure that they provide full access to the full range of activities that children partake of inside our schools. So what do I mean by a legal framework? Well, really a framework is a simple list of duties that schools have to comply with. We can group those duties into three. Firstly, the requirement not to discriminate against disabled children and young people. Secondly, they're required to ensure that reasonable adjustments are put in place to enable disabled children and young people to access the curriculum. And thirdly, there's a list of positive discrimination duties which require schools to produce disability access plans which demonstrate how they're going to progressively make their building more and more accessible. So in terms of discrimination, a school has to comply with a duty to make sure its staff do not treat a disabled child or young person unfavourably. So if I can use the example of a child with autism, if a school has a policy of sending or disciplining a child who calls out in class, and a child with autism calls out in class by virtue of their disability, then the school has to demonstrate that they're not treating that pupil less favourably by virtue of their disability. In simple terms, making an adjustment to ensure that that child can continue to access the curriculum.
How much will be left in the carafe after each person has had a cup?
So there is a real duty that schools have to abide to make the curriculum that disabled children and young people access accessible to them. Examples might be to provide rise and fall desks in curriculum subjects like science to enable them to work at the appropriate level. Less overt adjustments that they may make are, for instance, for a child with a hearing impairment, and the teacher having to think about how that child can best hear. And if we look around on this wall here, you can see that for those disabled children that are at a lower level than us by virtue of being confined to a wheelchair, they would be able to see displays that are mounted on the wall. Right, this lift is a clear example of the third group of duties that schools have to comply with, and they are the planning duties, where schools have to demonstrate how they are incrementally increasing the access, the physical access to the school building over a period of time. Now, quite clearly, a lift is an expensive item, and that's where the incremental plan comes into place, because the school won't be able to afford to install the lift next week or next month or even next year. But so long as they have that in the plan and other measures that they're going to take to incrementally improve access to the full range of the school building, measures such as putting in place ramps or handrails over a period of time. So how do schools comply with these duties? Well, clearly to be anticipatory, they need to develop a policy and be proactive about involving people in the community in developing that policy. Critically, disabled people, disabled children and young people. Once that policy has been developed, they need to communicate that policy clearly to parents and to staff. Then they need to train their staff to implement the policy. Once the policy is fully implemented and children and young people start to benefit from it, it needs to be monitored and reviewed and improvements incorporated on a year-by-year basis. So plan, do and review, the sort of cycle that all schools are used to. Now, our research suggests that those schools that are most successful at implementing disability policies are those that have strong leadership, that are forward planned, that have a can-do attitude, and most critically of all, have a welcoming and supportive ethos.